Stephen, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Adam. Thanks for having me. Really, really pleased to be here.
Of course, I got an intro from a previous guest, Dan, absolute legend of a guy. So That recommendation comes very highly appreciated. And I dug into your stuff. You seem super interesting. I really like your no BS approach to the personal development space, which can be full of a lot of crap sometimes. So yeah, brilliant. On that note, if we could get an elevator pitch of who you are, what you do, and how you contribute to the world, what would that sound like?
Well, I'm Stephen Timoney, obviously. We've already covered that part. But what do I do? I have got a real fascination or a real focus on doing less dumb shit. Mm-hmm. For about 10 years in my life, from 18, 19, all the way through to 28, 29, did a lot of dumb shit. And my elevator pitch would be that I am here to help people remove that dumb shit, escape ruts, and flow with momentum towards the key life pillars in their business or in their lives to get to those with a lot more ease than they're currently traveling towards them.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And what are the contexts of your early years that kind of allow us to understand you and why this is so important to you?
Well, as I kind of tapped into there a little bit, is I was a bit lost as a young adult. I did go to university. I moved from Northern Ireland. I grew up just outside Belfast in a town called Bangor, and I moved across to the north of England to go to university. But I didn't really have any purpose. I didn't have any direction. I fell in love with techno and house and going to drum and bass shows and festivals and all this kind of stuff, and really enjoyed the sort of the early 2000s into the period of the big super clubs, going to Ibiza and everything like that. And while that gave me kind of purpose, it didn't really give me any rewards. I kind of woke up at 28, 29 broke and kind of lost, and a lot of my friends were getting into buying houses and getting married, and I'm like still living like a student. So it was a bit of an awakening for me. But that period of 10 years where I kind of focused on dumb shit, where I kind of focused on being a hedonist, when I kind of ran away from my responsibilities, I ran away from my emotional problems, and I was kind of depressed and sad, and I used the drugs and the drink to make myself feel better. I kind of realized that I was hiding from who I should be, and I then started facing life of 100% responsibility. And that unique experience from my life has given me this sort of like almost superpower, or this ability that when I'm working with 6, 7, 8-figure business owners, I can I can sense, I can sniff out their BS, I can sniff out the dumb shit. And I really think that power has come from the fact that I did so much dumb shit in my life. I really put myself in a difficult position, and I ran away from those emotional and mental challenges that I should have been facing at that age.
Mm-hmm. Where do you think the 18-year-old you version focused on, partying? Where did that come from, do you think? Why was that so predominant?
I think for a few things. I think I'm a younger brother, so I didn't get the same same light as my older brother, the younger brother syndrome. I also had a friend pass away when I was 18, 19. He was within our friend group. He wasn't one of my close friends, but he was someone who I'd known for a couple of years, and he was a very, very good friend of my best friend at the time. And I think that made me very hedonistic in the sense of you only live once, and it rather than thinking long term and thinking about how do I become the best version of who I wanted to be, I went down the wrong path of, well, if life is so short, I might as well enjoy myself. And I think that had a huge influence on me. I also grew up in Northern Ireland, didn't enjoy it. I don't know if you know anything about Northern Ireland back in the 90s. There was a lot of 80s and 90s, a lot of bullshit going on there. And I really wanted just to leave that country. And it was almost I was running away from things. And that's why the 18-year-old probably fell into this love of house music and connection in nightclubs and being around a group of people on a similar kind of like almost sort of anti-cultural sort of vibe of like, fuck the system. We don't want to live like you. We want to choose a different path. And it was like that, very much like that. That's why I was in that, because I didn't want the 40 a year in a job sitting underneath a fluorescent light kind of experience. Mm-hmm. But instead of creating my own entrepreneurial journey, I went down the different path of party. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. And you mentioned the desire to just have fun because you only live once. But now I feel like there's a bit more balance to that. How would you go about balancing that you only live once mentality with long-term vision while still having fun, if you were to do it again when you were younger?
I don't think anybody really, my parents probably told me you've got to think about your future, but they made it out to sound very boring about you've got to save money, you've got to do this, you've got to, it wasn't framed in a powerful, you could have this amazing life. You could be free, you could be location free, whatever that is, you could be time, money, purpose, freedom. It was never sold to you like that. It was more sold and stop acting the fool and go get a job. It was kind of boring. And I think that something I didn't understand back then, and I've talked about it before, about identity, having the right clear identity, knowing that you can do these big things allows you to have sort of that long-term vision, but yet still have fun, because I still go out, I still go to festivals, I still go camping, I still have all the things that I do now in my 40s. I still kind of touch on those things a little bit, but I do it in a much more elegant way.
Do you think you have to sit in the mud before you can find the elegance, or you could jump ahead?
I think that sometimes we do learn better by, touching the stove. You don't know the stove's going to burn your fingers until you've actually done it, and then then you don't do it again. But I think sometimes when it comes to this sort of like mental and emotional stuff, we almost, the stove isn't so hot that it hurts us initially. It's like a slow decline into it, and we don't actually realize that it's like the lobster boiling in water.
Yeah.
He doesn't know he's boiling until he's dead. I think that happens with this when you don't have a clear identity in the future. You can kind of get away with partying for a couple of years when you're in your 20s, but by the time you get to your mid or late 20s, that's a significant chunk of time, and it takes you longer then to get back out of that. So I think, if going back to the main question, can you do it as a young person and have that identity and still have fun and not really derail your life? I think you can. I honestly do think you can, but it takes probably the right mentors, the right books, and the right mindset to want to do that.
What would those mentors, and what would you look for in a mentor in those books and mindset to do that correct? Because I know a lot of people that have this battle inside of them.
I think that the books that have really inspired me are the ones that color a positive future, the ones that really show you what's possible. I think that there's a lot of self-help books or time management books or productivity books out there that are very kind of dull and very, go do deep work, have these kind of things, and they're kind of boring, almost corporate. But the books that really have inspired me, they do give you this more element of hope, this inspiration, this idea that you are an unstoppable, abundant being. And then if you can tap into the right identity and keep aligned with it, you can create the life of your dreams. So you mentioned being, exploring positive ideas. Is that with your clients now? Do you talk to them about the media and content that they consume and the impact of, say, Twitter, getting into Twitter and being bombarded with negativity all the time? And also, along that note, how does the law of assumption that you've mentioned before tie into all of this? It's a good question. I think when I'm working with a client, primarily I work with 6- and 7-figure business owners. I do talk a lot about your inputs, and a lot of them do say that one of their problems is too much scrolling, too much time wasting, and a lot of that dumb shit, as I put it, comes back to a lack of clear pillars, a lack of clear structure. It comes back to not being specifically clear on your own personal standards. I think 90% of the people who I speak to or more, when they first reach out to me for coaching, I almost know what their problem is, and their problem is a lack of vision, it's a lack of identity, it's a lack of like really clear 18-month out goals that they're really working towards. Because when you have those in place, it really reduces your need or want for that dopamine chase during the day when you're unsure of what to do and you've got a whole bunch of things in your to-do list, and the next thing you know what, I'm just going to give myself 5 minutes on Twitter, and that 5 minutes turns into half an hour. And that comes from procrastination. That comes from unsure. It comes from that feeling of frustration if you're not really flowing towards your goals, and that's why you look for that dopamine release. And tapping into the law of assumption. The law of assumption basically states that what you think about comes true. If you think that your life is frustrating, if you think that you're stuck, guess what happens? You're stuck.
Yeah.
It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So when I talk about the law of assumption with clients, it's almost like a daily framing using I am statements and getting them to assume that they are their best versions of themselves, to assume that the day is going to work out well, to assume that they're going to be highly productive for 4 or 5 hours, the first 4 or 5 hours of the day. Because when you tap into that assumption in the morning and then you realign with it in breaks using meditation or mini walks, which I'm a huge fan of both of those things, especially mini walks, it allows you to get a lot more work done, but it doesn't feel like work, if that makes sense.
So what's a mini walk? It's just like a 5 minute, you get up and move?
Yeah, 10 minutes around the building. Okay. I have 10-minute walks, I have 30-minute walks, and I have like an hour loop. So I have these different walk loops, and I will typically do a 10 to 20-minute walk 2, maybe even 3 times a day, and then usually do like an hour, 45 minutes to an hour walk once a day. And my mini walks are always no phone. My longer walks, sometimes I'll take my phone and listen to an audiobook.
So when would you use a mini walk as a tool versus a longer walk? Like, what's the priority?
The mini walks are in between my deep work zones in the morning. So I get up and I get outside pretty early on just to refresh myself, get that circadian rhythm going, get a bit of sun. It's especially good at this time of year. It's a little more difficult to go out at 6 o'clock in the morning in the middle of December in Vancouver because it's dark and it's usually raining. But during the summertime, it's great. And then usually I'll do another one at 9:30 or 10. I'll go for another mini walk. Just, again, it's fresh air. It's because you're inside and your vision is like this. And when you go outside quickly, it expands. Some deep breaths, a little bit of box breathing. And I just use those as a reset. Like, I finished this part of my day. And rather than opening Twitter or fucking about for 10 minutes doing something else, I go for a walk and then I come back in. And then I go straight back into that task. Like, I'm not a Jedi Knight at that. I'm not perfect. But it definitely, going for the walk definitely gives you a reset where you're less likely to do the dumb shit. You're less likely to doom scroll. You're less likely to jump around your email. You're more likely to jump onto the task that you've been thinking about in that little walk. And then typically later in the day, around 2, 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock at night, that's when I'll do my longer walk, and that's a task switch. I've done my work for the day, and I'm moving into educational or reflection time for the day.
Sure.
And that's why I'll listen to an audiobook, or maybe I won't. Maybe I'll listen to music, but sometimes I'll not even listen to anything. But I would say 70 to 80% of the time, I'm usually listening to an audiobook on those afternoon walks.
So I haven't heard much about doom scrolling and your habits, including spending a lot of time on Twitter and stuff, but you also have a reasonably large Twitter following. So how do you juggle the productive use of Twitter, with the following versus complete time wasting?
I think about things like my food diet. So I'm reasonably healthy. I could do better. But I know in the morning when I get up, I'm not going to eat Haagen-Dazs. I'm not going to have a Mars bar. I'm not going to, put horrible syrup all over my cereal rather than, what I mean? Examples could go on. I'm going to eat healthily. So I think of my work like that as well. I allow myself to have the sugar of the internet later in the day. I allow myself to go on and look at soccer news or football news, to look at normal news briefly. I have a couple of different Twitter accounts that I use for that. I keep my actual Steve Timoney business Twitter very much just all focused on the business world, on marketing, on copywriting, on self-development, all the people I follow. So my For You page and my following are people who I want to engage with. But then I have a second Twitter for sports and news. But I typically don't look at that Twitter until later in the day because I am reasonably structured that allows me to be disciplined. And that's just the way I think of it. So I know that later in the day, I will give myself time to do it. So in the morning, I don't do it. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. It's a part of your daily routine to have that fun.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a lot of people out there who will be like a lot of productivity coaches and stuff, or people in my arena that I'd be like, oh, never doom scroll. And I'm like, that's impossible. We're all humans. We all do it. Like, but just give yourself time to do it outside of your peak cognitive abilities. Like, I do not mind doing a bit of scrolling when I'm eating my dinner. You know what I mean? It's 6, 7 o'clock at night. I've done 5, 6, 7 hours of work or 4 hours of work, whatever you want to put in. And I'm one of those, I am off that sort of mindset of allow yourself these things, because sometimes scrolling is kind of fun. No,
go on.
I was just going to say, I do know that there is a switch inside of me. I can feel it when it goes from fun to dopamine, and I can feel that switch. And when that switch happens, I usually put the phone down and go and do something else.
Okay, fair enough. So you briefly mentioned as well with positive facing, making your life decisions into I am statements and having goals and trying to maintain an era of positivity. How does somebody manage potentially really significant setbacks while also maintaining that positivity?
That's a very good question, because we all face setbacks, and the worst thing you can do when you face a setback is to negatively spiral over it and think that you were wrong. Unless you were wrong, you did something stupid like commit a robbery. Do you know what I mean? But like a setback is usually something that wasn't a set of results that didn't go your way. But there's always a lesson from setbacks. Like, for instance, if you had an Amazon store and then all of a sudden your product got banned, you would probably have some type of like plan in place where another product would take its place. You would have like things in place that allow you to then pivot when there's setbacks happen. Or for instance, I don't know where that idea came from, but for a better one for me in my industry would be, for instance, if Stripe all of a sudden told me we don't want you using our service anymore, I have PayPal as a backup. So I can quickly switch over to taking payments through PayPal. And that means that my payments of my clients or things that I'm selling aren't going to be disrupted, because I have the options. But sometimes with setbacks, the reason why they're so hard and they hurt us is because we don't have an option, a second option. We don't have the structure built that allows us to be like, oh, okay, that happened. Well, I can take lesson out of that and move on. Sometimes a setback happens and then we catastrophize, we spiral, we play the victim. But I think if you have very clear future identity, if you have very high standards, and if you're taking the actions aligned with that identity and standards, you become the type of person that sees setbacks as part of the process. They see it as part of the journey, where you would almost say to yourself, okay, if the ultimate version, multi-million-dollar super version of Stephen was dealing with this, what would he do? He would probably do A, B, and C. He wouldn't catastrophize and do X, Y, and Z.
Sure,
so
that makes sense.
Gives you the perspective, yeah,
for sure. There's a big. You've mentioned a big, future self focus here. What is the importance of that future self focus? How do you create it? And what's an example of your experience that was a positive when you began to work on the future self focus?
It's a great question. And I'll frame it in my own journey. About 2012, I really started to sort my life out. I was like 31, 32. And I fell into the normal productivity, smart goals, morning routines, evening routines, and trying to start all these new habits, almost the atomic habit way of life, stacking things, adding things on. And a lot of that stuff, all it did was like make work projects for me. It felt like a lot of like extra work. A lot of it failed, even though I made progress and got promotions and got better jobs and I was making progress. The main thing that helped me through all of that was, first of all, instead of stacking habits, it was removing dumb shit. It was actually looking at the things that were lowering my energy and removing the stuff that was lowering my energy. Because a lot of people talk about the 80-20 principle. And they say that you should focus on the 20% that gives you the most gains. But what a lot of people who talk about that miss is you cannot increase 20% if you don't reduce the 80%. We only have 100% to work with. Yeah. So your focus shouldn't be on the 20%. Your focus should be on, okay, if I've got 20% that's working over here, what's part of my 80% that isn't working? And when I started tapping into that and removing the dumb shit, I saw my progression really, really jump at a faster rate. And then while I was still stuck and kind of angry that all my hard work wasn't making progress, I made this shift probably 4 years ago when I really got into, maybe 5 years ago when I really got into future self work. Dr. Benjamin Hardy's written a couple of books about it. Personality Isn't Permanent. It's a great one. I think it came out in 2020, 2021. I can't remember. And it started to shift that I realized that identity was the most important part of it. And the reason why I struggled early on in my personal development career is I was habit stacking and using all these deep work zones and using all these sort of nighttime and evening routines without actually identifying as a person who enjoys that.
Yeah.
I didn't identify as somebody who wanted to do that. I was forcing myself into doing it, and it became like a chore. It became like hard work. And then when you're doing all these habits and you read these books, and there's shysters out there like Ty Lopez who are like, I read one book and I became a billionaire. And then you're like, you've read the same book and you're like, nothing changed for me. And it's because they're full of shit mostly, but it's because there's a lot more going on than just these simple shifts. There is an actual massive behavioral change that has to happen within you. You have to identify as somebody who likes getting up and going for a morning walk. You have to identify as somebody who likes writing an email a day. You have to identify as somebody who likes coaching. I'm just talking about myself here. You have to identify as somebody who wants to go to the gym 2-3 times a week. You've got to identify as somebody who's strict with their diet, who likes to primarily focus on better nutrition. Even though I still love chocolate bars, I've got a problem. But it all comes back to identity. And I think that's the big shift. I'm not sure if I answered your question exactly, but the future self shift comes from how you discover your identity is really looking at the person who you want to become and then becoming that person today. I don't know if you ever heard of the term be, do, have.
I have, yeah.
Yeah. So
let's run through it, yeah.
Yeah. So be, do, have is basically be who you want to be, do what they would do, and then have their life. So I've taken this philosophy to heart, and I actually made it part of my coaching program where I asked myself, how the feck do you be, do, have? And then I realized through the last 3 to 5 years, mostly 3 years working with clients, and then looking at the results and looking at how you're looking at the end result and working backwards with some of my top client results, I realized what happened was we created an identity, we set out standards, and then we took actions to change our behavior to match those identity and standards. So be, do, have is essentially identity, standards, actions. So you have to look at your future self. Well, how do you become your future self? Well, you have to write out clearly what that identity is, life pillars. You have to look what goals you want to achieve, the vision. Then once you've written out those, you've got to think about, well, what standards does that person have? Will they go to bed early? They regulate their mental, emotional, and physical worlds properly through meditation, through walking, through journaling, through speaking to people. What actions do these people take? Will they do 90-day sprints? They work for 4 hours a day. They send an email every day or whatever that is for your environment. And then you write out all these steps, and all of a sudden you've got this blueprint of not only of who you want to be in the future, but the actions that you would have to take today to actually be that person. And that's the essence of my acorn thinking philosophy is creating that identity based on your future self, looking at the standards that you think that person would have, which is you, because those standards are inside you, and then you act like that person today.
What do you do when you've set the goal of a standard that you want to have and then you go back into old habits?
Setting higher standards for yourself is difficult. It's not click your fingers, boom, you've done it once. But there's this idea that in personal development or in performance, high performance, it's all about knocking it out of the park every day. And I do think that there are a few voices out there, and I don't want to name too many, but I'll go after a big guy, Hormozi. Hormozy touches on the hustle stuff quite a lot. Like, you got to work 24/7, 365. And I understand him, and I got a lot of respect for Hormozy, but sometimes I think what he says is a little dangerous. It's a little leads people to burnout. Because if you're not hitting those high standards, you've probably got a mental, emotional, or physical block somewhere, internally or externally, that's stopping you. And just by brute force, you might figure it out, but you're more likely going to put yourself into burnout because you're not actually taking a step back and be like, well, if I can't reach that standard, why is that?
Yeah. Yeah. So how does, if you've got a version of yourself that you want to create, and maybe we can use your example, like I'm guessing now are full-time into the coaching world, but you wouldn't have been that for a while. So how have you managed to juggle the process between being who you were, but needing to make the change, but needing to also survive, juggling that into becoming who you are now, full-time, full energy, if that makes sense?
Yeah. I mean, I did quite well before leaving my job and becoming a coach.
Well, that's even more challenging,
Yeah, you could say I'd reached a certain point within my corporate sort of world that I was on a very comfortable wage that was good, and I chose to leave that in 2021 during the peak of the pandemic because I love making life difficult for myself. And it was a big shock. And it took me probably 6 months to a year to get a little bit of momentum. 6 to 7 months, I would say, to really get some momentum. But I did load up a decent runway. And I'm in a good place now where things... This year's been a bit more difficult. This year's been a bit weird. I think not to get too into it, but I think the US election and economy is definitely affecting... different things. Being a Canadian, 90% of my clients are American. But I don't want to get too deep into that. But it took me a while to get that flow, but it also took me a while to figure out what it is I actually wanted to do and how to do it. And I think that the struggle for me, and the thing that really kind of stressed me out, was copying the wrong people when I first started, because I was unaware or naive of what business looks like. Because there's social media business, there's easy money on Twitter, selling PDFs on Gumroad, or doing stuff like becoming a coach that coaches people on how to be a coach, or becoming a writer that coaches writers on how to write. There's a lot of that going on, but I've never tapped into that. And I think copying how those people use that model is not the right model for me to use. And I think I fell into that trap, and that was difficult for me to get some momentum until I actually figured out, oh, hold on a second, I'm actually playing a different game than these people. So I have to approach it slightly differently.
What's an example?
I think the example I just give you there is a lot of people were focusing on lower dollar ticket.
Sorry, what was your example? Like, so who were those people that you were focusing on, and then how did you move your direction away from that?
Yeah, I think I was focusing a lot on, I don't want to name names because some of them are my friends.
Sure.
Online. But I think I was focusing on the people who were doing the sort of, I don't want to call multi-level marketing, but
sure.
they're doing low dollar communities, low dollar products to get people in, and they're not really focusing on coaching per se as a high ticket option. They're looking more for volume of people to buy their programs or courses or to be in their communities. For me, I'm solely focused on working one-on-one with people. So I'm looking to have high ticket clients, and for me to sort of bring those clients in, I need to be looking more at workshops, at things that are actually helpful to them, not $10 products or $20 communities or whatever that is, and going for volume, because the clients that I'm looking for aren't necessarily in those types of communities. If that makes sense?
Yeah, sure. That makes a lot of sense. So finding the right people to model off was critical. And when did you realize you were making the mistake? Probably
about 2 years ago. So okay. I made a little bit of money, and I got a little bit of momentum during the peak of COVID in 2021 and into 2022. But I think the summer of 2022, I definitely realized that I was playing the wrong kind of game. And even to this day, I still, with positioning and marketing, I'm still pivoting and changing. But I knew then I needed to change. I changed up how I spoke online about 18 months ago. I moved away from, I would say, more platitude, focusing on threads that brought me followers, and then started focusing more on my ICP, my ideal client profile, and I'm trying to speak to their problems directly rather than going for wide information. And then also in the last sort of 8 months, I've become more focused on email marketing. Or preparing and creating an email on a daily basis, Monday to Friday. I tend to take Saturday and Sunday off because I believe peak results come from peak rest. So I need to follow my own teaching. And actually, I don't want to be someone who's online every day. So if I want to teach my clients not to be on all the time, I should also not be on all the time. Just it's my integrity. But a lot of that, I think I'm still growing. I'm still changing. I'm still learning. Business is a endless game of learning and pivots and growing. And I've changed a lot over the last 18 months or 2 years. But I definitely think the first time I realized I was playing the wrong game and it really hit me between the eyes would probably be early summer 2022, when I was like, oh, I'm copying the wrong people here.
And you have mentioned that 100% responsibility is critical here for your ability to make better decisions. And it sounds like you had to take on that responsibility at some point and go, hey, I can't blame the external world for anything anymore. I need to focus on me. So what's an example of how you took 100% responsibility, and how did that positively impact you?
Again, it's a fantastic question, because I have a slightly hot take about this. Give it
to me.
I don't think people who work for other people are taking 100% responsibility for their life.
What do you mean?
I don't know you actually understand what responsibility is until you have to put work out into the world that actually gets you paid. So maybe commission sales people would understand this when they're working within the structure of like an entrepreneurial structure. Maybe, but I think entrepreneurs themselves fundamentally understand this. Their effort, their energy, and the content or the services they put out in the world, that's how they get paid. So they're 100% responsible. When I worked in corporate, I could take a week off and still go to work. If that makes sense. I can cruise for a week or two.
Or 3.
I know plenty, 3, 4. You know, if I don't put any effort in for a few days at work, it's not going to show up because the bar is so low. Now, if you're a high-performing sort of leader within a tech company that's a startup, you've probably got that understanding of that entrepreneurial spirit and that almost constant noise in your brain that what I do produces my income. But I do think a lot of people, and I don't mean to blanket people, but I do think that a lot of people who say they're 100% responsible don't actually know what 100% responsibility is.
So what's an example of somebody who is 100% responsible and an example of somebody who isn't, based on maybe your client experiences, and how does somebody move away from going from, say, 50 to 60% to 100% without throwing themselves so far in the deep end that if it blows up, then they're just fucked?
Yeah, I think that 100% responsibility means that you're open to pivot, you're open to change, you're open to feedback, you're willing to listen to the perspective of other people. I think that I've had 1 or 2 clients that obviously all coaches go through this, but I've had 1 or 2 clients that haven't gelled with and I haven't really enjoyed working with. But one of them in particular, I didn't enjoy working with because they refused to change. Change only happens when you decide to change. When I did my reverse sort of post-mortem of working with that person, they were still within a pay structure that was more based on like a corporate world. They were still getting paid. They would get paid anyway each week or month. And I started to formulate this idea that a lot of entrepreneurs actually fundamentally understand this responsibility. They understand they have to listen to feedback. They understand that they have to pivot. They understand that they have blind spots. And most entrepreneurs that I know actually have a number of coaches or have been in multiple coaching programs. They go looking to fix problems, not only for other people, but for themselves. And I can I mean, I've been an entrepreneur for 3 years, just over 3 years, and it has been the most, it feels like 10. I'm just going to say that. It feels like 10 years because of the growth that I've had. I can't even remember who I was as a person in 2021 when I started my business compared to, like, if I think back 5 years ago, like, wow, I'm like a day and night. Where if I think between the ages of like 32 to maybe 36, those 5 year periods in my life, I'm kind of the same person. If that makes sense. And I think that's part of the 100% responsibility. And I've known plenty of business owners who've come and gone back in, you know, or people who have tried to grow a personal brand online. And I do think sometimes one of the key reasons why people do fail is because they victimize themselves a little bit. They refuse to raw dog life. They refuse to take on the emotions and be like, this is my responsibility. The algorithm isn't working, my responsibility. You know, my emails aren't being opened, that's my responsibility. People aren't reaching out to me to book calls with me, that's my responsibility. You know, it all comes back to that key element of whatever's wrong, good or bad, it's on you.
That can be overwhelming to potentially most people. So how do you shift your mindset to be strong enough to handle that level of chaos, potentially internal chaos that can develop? Because it's a lot. And then you add the financial risk to it and maybe a family, and it can be too much for a lot of people.
It can be. It can be too much if you go into it unprepared, if you go into it without thinking about what you're actually doing and why you're doing it. I know a lot of my failures came from doing something that wasn't really aligned with myself, like going after job titles or chasing some type of result or attaching myself to some material goal or wage level, and then getting it and still feeling unhappy. It's because I was chasing it for the wrong reasons. It wasn't something that was like aligned internally with who I really wanted to be. It was more like, as Buddha says, all problems come back to desire and attachment. So I think that people who jump blindly into things without having a monetizable skill set first, that's going to really, excuse the language, fuck you over. Where I have 10 to 15 years of leadership experience, a lot of that, the back end of that was project management and coaching. I'm very passionate about the subject. I got the books behind me, you know, I've the books in front of me. The personal development, self-development, leadership. This is my jam. Now, over the last couple of years, I've had to really fall into marketing and writing because I'm realizing to do the things that I want to do, I have to take 100% responsibility and understand that I need to become a fantastic writer and marketer just to do the thing that I want to do. So it's never just one thing that makes you successful. That's why it's hard to pick out one book.
Sure, I understand.
It's impactful. But yeah, so going back to your question, if someone's doing that, I think that if you're doing it for the wrong reasons, if you're trying to run away from a job, if you're trying to think that you're going to just like create some sort of magical life without actually sitting down and thinking about the second, third, or fourth consequences, without actually having a clear identity, without having clear standards, without actually knowing what you're doing, you're going to overwhelm yourself.
So just to recap that, it's figure out who you want to be, put it into present tense, begin to develop some hard, actionable skills that you can use in the marketplace, and then begin to slowly make that shift across into the person that you want to be, but with the foundation of like strength, and maybe have like 6 months of savings while you're at it.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. The 6 months of savings is very helpful, having a runway, as they say. But yeah, the foundations matter. I believe that works for any walk of life. It doesn't matter whether you want to stay in corporate, whether you're starting a business, whether you're trying to find a partner. If you are clear on who you want to be, if you're clear on what you're passionate about, what you're interested in, and you follow that path, life aligns with you.
So how do you know if you're not in alignment, and how do you get back into alignment?
Alignment to me is feeling like you're a squirrel. You're squirrely. That's how you're when you're out of alignment, you're moving too quickly. You're jumping from thing to thing. You're in the curse of short-termism. Yeah. You're in the dopamine spiral, the negative dopamine spiral. I should state that because dopamine itself is positive if you tap into it properly. And that to me is the trap. That's when you know you're out of alignment. If you're opening Twitter, closing Twitter, and then you open it again straight away on your phone, you're out of alignment. You need to go for a walk. You need to get the fuck outside and touch some grass. So when you get into that state, that's when you know you're out of alignment, and you can feel it because you're usually up here. There's usually noise or feeling, especially on the right side of the brain. Sorry, left side of the brain. For me, I can feel like I'm squirrely. It's like when you have too much coffee. But like when you're aligned, you feel. For me, breathing, going for a walk, I feel like my power is coming from within me. It's coming from my gut. It's coming from inside of me. That's when I'm aligned. And just talking about it right now, I can almost feel myself realigning with who I am just by talking about that, because I'm so used to doing that. And I think that's one of the most essential tricks that I've really used. I don't want to call it a hack because I hate hacks. I think hacks are for hacks. But this tool, let's say, of breathing and knowing the power of inside you. Like, I wake up most mornings, and one of the things I say to myself, what's the most important thing about my life right now? And I say it's knowing my power. And I say it to myself in the morning as I go for my walk, because it's before work, before learning new skills, it's aligning myself with that knowing that I have abundant energy, that I am not a single wave smashing against rocks. I am the whole deep blue ocean. And
on all of those notes, you briefly mentioned, it all ties into one another, and I want to double click on the writing side of things. So how did you become a better writer, for one, and how did you know that you were a shit writer to begin with?
I'm still a shit writer.
Shitter writer.
Shitter writer. I've gone from super shit to okay.
Kind of shit.
Kind of shit. I'm still not. I have a lot of emotional garbage around that, and we can crack that can open, and we can dive into that a little bit to show you how my identity has shifted with that, because I suffer from some type of dyslexia. I obviously have some type of ADHD. My ego will not allow me to go and get tested, because I really do believe that when you have good structure, these things shouldn't really matter. And I think that for myself, because I've done pretty well in life, and I don't want to take pills to sort myself out. But with all that said, I ran away from jobs in my 20s. Because at university, I barely scraped through university. I was a CD student my whole life. I have no idea how I wrangled myself to go to a university in the UK. I think they just lowered the bar because it was part of the process. More universities were springing up. It was like allowing more people to get higher education, because it was a business. I was part of the wave in the late 90s when I went to university. I was early 2000s. I was part of the wave that started to pay for university in the UK.
Yeah.
Where before it was free. So it was at the tip of the iceberg of it becoming a business.
Yeah.
So they definitely lowered the bar, and more colleges became universities. So I went to one of those colleges that became a university. I went and got a degree. That's great. But I was terrible at writing, got really low marks, always got criticized by my spelling error, told spelling mistakes and errors and grammars and stuff. And I was told by many people that I wasn't clear in my points, that my writing was jumbled, that my ideas were all over the place. And I had a fear over that, because I didn't want to write emails. I didn't want to work in a job in my early 20s where my writing skills would highlight what I perceived as me being stupid. Or me being not as smart as people. So I went into sales, I went into retail, where I was leading teams and speaking to people, and 90% of my day would have been talking, with a little bit of email work, but they're short emails. People aren't asking me to do reports. People aren't asking me to write things. I don't have to be in a call center taking calls. I was very slow at typing. I still am. And I, for years, ran away from writing. And I even, in 2017, when I started to think about becoming a coach, or a little earlier, I was like, how am I going to do this? Because I don't have the ability to write. So I started a YouTube channel. And I've put 200 videos up there. It didn't do very well. I've got about 2,000 subscribers. I've never really cracked YouTube. But one of the elements that I realized doing YouTube is my videos were better when I actually wrote them out before, rather than just having an idea and talking into a camera. Who would have thought? And this started getting me into writing content. And then in Twitter in 2020, during the pandemic, I just started writing on Twitter. And then I got followers, and I was like, oh shit, what's going on here? But I only
was
really
it all
started
long
writing.
form or was it short form?
It was short form. It was tweet. It was just like small banging tweets, like little like platitudes and stuff. But I got confidence that my writing kind of worked because I started getting a following and I started like meeting other creators. And then I started writing an email probably in 2021 or 2022. I really got into it. I was on ConvertKit for a little bit, and I was writing a weekly newsletter. And I can tell you right now, the first one is fucking awful. Like, it's just trash. There's no clear idea. It's all over the place. But over the last 3 years, because of having a business, I've had to like really improve my writing skills, and now I'm a lot more confident about it. But I had to shift my identity around that. To sort of like tie a bow around this. I did not identify as a writer. Even when I was first on Twitter, I felt like I was doing something that was against who I thought I was. It was going against emotional barriers. It was going against limiting beliefs. I now see myself as a writer. I now see myself as somebody who enjoys writing. I get a buzz out of writing an email. I spend about an hour in the morning writing an email, getting 300 to 600 words together. It's something that I know that I like. Now, am I great at it? Am I world class at it? I don't think I am currently. Am I okay at it? Yeah, I think I'm okay at it because I've brought in business. Like every single client that I have up until this time has come from me posting on LinkedIn or Twitter, and that comes from then writing. So when you actually do the math, I'm a writer who has a business. And that is a reframe that allowed me maybe 18 months ago. I had a real problem with it. I was really struggling with my writing. I was really struggling with my emails. I was really struggling to really make progress. And then I made this sort of identity shift. I sat down and went through my own process, and I realized, and I had an epiphany, and I actually spoke to a couple of people about it. It was like I, up until that point, had never identified as a writer.
So what was the shift? Like, who is a writer now? Who are you as a writer?
Well, I see myself as somebody who is helping people do less dumb shit, and I'm teaching people through writing how to highlight that, how to get over overwhelm, how to improve their self-belief, how to align themselves on a daily basis with their future self. And I just see myself as writing is the best medium to do that. Writing is the foundation to YouTube videos. Writing is the foundation to podcasts. Writing is the foundation to better thinking. Everything comes back to better communication and writing. Like I mentioned earlier on in the quickfire questions that you asked me, what one thing I could go back and tell my 30-year-old self or my 20-year-old self, it would be take writing seriously.
Yeah. So how did you have you read any specific books or done any specific courses on copywriting and writing generally?
Yeah, I mean, I've read a bunch of books. Like, off the top of my head, it's going to be quite hard to name them properly. I might have to look behind me. But I've listened to books like on how to write well. I've The One Thing, Make It Stick, books like that. Behind me, I've got the Byron letters from Gary Halbert. I've got copywriting handbooks. I've got other Dan Kennedy books back there. So it's
literally reading.
The Byron. So I've got I've got a bunch of Gary Halbert stuff downloaded from PDFs that somebody sent me, another copywriter, and I like reading his stuff. I read a bunch of people like that. I read a lot of those books. I try not to get myself influenced by too many people. I do like reading Ben Settle's emails. I do like his stuff. I've bought a couple of his books. He's very much in tune with that kind of Gary Halbert stuff. And that's who I see myself as. There are a couple of creators online who I enjoy reading. Ben Settle probably being one of them. Eddie Kwan being another one. There's a guy who does most of his work on LinkedIn. Sean, oh my God, I've forgotten his last name. And they write in this sort of like, they have a business that is based on email, and they write these fun 3 to 1,000 word emails that are kind of impactful. They're a little bit like Gary Halbert's Byron letters. They're an insight into their life, and they connect it with the great storytelling. Kieran Drew's pretty good at that as well. He's a sort of in my network a little bit. I've spoken to him a few times. Really good dude. And I really enjoy that sort of art of storytelling, but also I tend to enjoy more of the in-your-face, do less dumb shit, no BS kind of guys that write like that. There are a lot of people out there writing very good storytelling emails, but I find them kind of almost too LinkedIn style for me, a little bit too normcore or whatever you want to call it. Yeah, just like normie, kind of normal. Like, cool.
Okay.
Yeah, I do like a little bit of that. I don't want to say vulgar, but that's sort of like no nonsense, straight to the point. So I do gravitate towards people who speak like that, and the fact that you're reading Gary Halbert his Byron letters, it's very much kind of his style, is that no nonsense approach.
For sure. I mean, I think at the core of it, there's a lot of noise, so you want to get to the point pretty quickly.
Yeah.
So, speaking of no nonsense, you spoke about sniffing out people's bullshit. How does somebody go about doing that? And what's an example of a big impact that it's had on maybe a client or even your story?
Yeah, it's really good. I'll give you a client example, and then maybe I'll link in my example. I've got a couple of client examples. I worked with a guy, a couple of years ago now, one of my first clients who got like a really great result for me within a couple of weeks of working together. And his problem was that he kind of lost a little bit of self-confidence in himself, that he was using a lot of like productivity hacks and he was kind of moving things around. And he wanted to do a few extra things, but he didn't think he had the skill set to do them. He was like, well, I'm not a good enough business owner. This guy was in his mid-20s and he had never gone to university. He left high school at 18 and sold his first business for like $200K. When he was like 21, and he reinvested that. Yeah, then he reinvested that money into a partnership into an apparel company with an older business guy, and the business is doing 7 figures. And he's telling me that he doesn't feel like he has the right confidence to go out and coach other people about what he's doing. And I laughed. Like I said, dude, you've got more experience than 99% of the people on Twitter who are pretending to be business coaches.
Yeah.
You sold a business for profit and now you're working in a 7-figure business with one other guy. And I give him that perspective. And then he was like, oh yeah, you're right. He never, I called him out a little bit on his dumb shit, as I would say. But then with that conversation, it built trust. And then when he described what he was doing each day, I went through and I just asked him a very, very straightforward question. What makes you money? What makes your business money? And he says outreach. And I said, well, how many hours outreach do you do each day? And he was like, I don't know, maybe an hour every other day. And I was like, well, what would your business look like if you did 2 hours every day? And he'd be like, I don't know, I'll give it a go. Or he said it'd probably make more money. And then lo and behold, 2 weeks later,
he made more money.
He made more money. He made a $50,000 sale that actually ended up being a multi-year it's over $1 million contract, but spread over years. It wasn't all up front.
Yeah.
But that all came from, this idea that they had lacked self-belief because they weren't clear on their self-identity of how good they actually were. And then that lack of self-belief had then sort of cascaded down into their daily actions where they were avoiding what they're good at or avoiding what would build their business because they were lacking confidence that they actually knew what they were doing in business. So when you saw...
You go.
Yeah, come on.
No, you go.
I was going to say, so when you solve the big limiting belief, the big worry that I don't think I'm good enough, you say, well, you are, because you've got all these gains. Look at what you've done factually, not just subjectively, but actually objectively, you have done these things. And when you show that to a client, especially 6 and 7 figure business owners who I work with, when you objectively show them how great what they've done, and then why are you worried about this thing right now? Why are you doubting yourself? You've done the great stuff. That's usually a massive shift I've done. That's not just one client. That is a process I've done multiple clients now, more than multiple, 5, 6, 7, 8 clients. It's stacking their gains, really checking out and showing them the great that they've done already, removing some of that current lack of belief that they have because they've got themselves thinking the wrong way and haven't got a clear identity, getting them really focused on a clear identity. And then that allows them to see that what they were doing was dumb shit.
So what if you don't have the wins under your belt and you're starting...
Everybody has wins. I don't. Maybe you don't have wins in business because you're just starting out. Sorry to jump in.
Sure, go for it. No, go for it. That's it.
But everybody has wins. So I didn't have a business 3 years ago. So I don't have any business wins. But I knew that I moved from Ireland to go to university when I was 18, 19. I know that I moved from Ireland to Vancouver when I was 30. And I know that I got 6-figure roles in corporate by the time on the back end of my 30s and earlier in sales. So when I look at my wins, I've shown that I can take massive leaps. I've shown the adaptability to actually make money within different environments. So I have already won in certain places in my life. And then it's just about taking those wins and those gains and being like, well, I've done these big things before. So is really sending a daily email as big as moving from Ireland to the UK to Canada? No. That I've done bigger things in my past than the small things that I'm currently doing right now that I think is going to change my business.
Okay. So that's just a mindset shift of being like appreciating the potential wins, but that aren't specific to what you're doing now, but just noticing them as moments where you have shown up for yourself.
Yeah, it really is. It's really about understanding that you have a plethora, you have a bucket full of these big life moments that mentally, emotionally, and physically that have actually changed you as a person and have given you a toolbox that you can lean into and use today. And I've never met anybody, I've never worked with anybody over a 6-month period with a client that has done something in those 6 months that is bigger than something that they've done in their life, like getting married, having children, moving across the world, scaling to 7 figures in their business or beyond 8 figures. There are big things that each of us has done. Whether you haven't started a business, whether you're thinking about starting a business, you have an abundant bucket of great wins in your life already, and you just need to look at them as wins. You need to see everything that you've done in your past has led you to this moment today. And if you're thinking about starting a business, if you're thinking about doing something new in your life, the reason why you're thinking that is because all your previous experiences have led you to that moment to think about it. If that makes sense. Yeah,
that makes complete sense. So well, we are the culmination of our experiences at the end of the day, and you can add value to different industries based on very unique experiences. So I wonder, just going right back, like you mentioned you spent a lot of time, in like festivals and events and connecting with music people and going to those events. How has that positively impacted your ability as a business owner now and a coach?
So that's a great question. I actually see myself as almost like a DJ in a sense that I've been into the music stuff for since I was in my late teens, really into the electronic music stuff. And I thought about this when I used to DJ in my 20s, or tried to. I'm okay at it. Like I can hold a set together. I'm not bad at it, but I'm not musically talented compared to some of the DJs who I knew growing up and some of the ones who were very successful. But I still hung around with those people, and I understood the talent they have, and I've got a lot of respect for them. But I see myself now as somebody who is producing a vibe, somebody who is producing a type of frequency to attract other people to my house party, to my festival, to me, because the beats that I put out, the things that I consistently talk about, those are the genre of people, so to speak, that I want to attract. I'm playing house and techno, and I want other people who like house and techno to come and hang out in my festival. I'm not playing really random glitchy dubstep or really hard psytrance. Those people can go and find their arenas where those people are playing that kind of music. So I do get a lot of ideas from the world of music. I have made a lot of connections that it is about a vibration. Your life is a vibe, and how you present yourself and what you put out, the vibration and music that you play, whether it's your writing, your post, the way you show up, how you dress, how you just approach life, that vibration, that music attracts people back to you as an artist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes complete sense. I mean, you briefly mentioned that you're not, the analogy is that you're playing house versus, glitch hop and dubstep, etc. But You also mentioned that you shifted your content from wide viral to more niche and potentially less viral. Now, I'm curious, as you were developing into the Twitter writing, would you say if you were to go back and do it again, it would be the same path you would take where you start wide, get some wins, some viral wins, and then realize you have a skill in it and tightening it up, or just going straight for your individual niche from the get-go?
It all depends on what you're trying to do and what you're trying to sell. So the preference that it's like looking at your data and then looking for your why. Mm-hmm. If you are going to sell, let's use one of the absolute goats at this, Dan Coe. Mm-hmm. He's very wide with a lot of his concepts, but some of his videos on YouTube go very deep as well. But he's on Twitter, and a lot of his sort of social media posts are quite wide. Mm-hmm. They're quite philosophical. And then when he gets people in the funnel, it gets deep. And so he's really good at that volume. Mm-hmm. Absolutely, he's probably one of the best at it. Those videos he did for a while, the black and white ones, I don't know if you came across them. He got blew up on Instagram. But yeah, so it's if you look at someone who's a goat at that, they're playing a wide game. So because they're looking for volume, but for me, I'm not looking for volume. I'm looking for specificity with one person, one on one.
It's a different business model.
It's a different business model. Yeah, so that's going to change how you approach content, because it's your outcome. What are you actually looking to achieve with your content? And this is where I talked about me making a mistake. I followed the wide model. But with the wrong type of product at the end of it, where if I could lose 30,000 or 40,000 of my followers, if I could go down from 70k followers on Twitter to like 30k or 25k, but have been on a very specific message for the last 3 years and have like 1,000 raving fans and have a more people engaged in my content because it's very, very specifically about the problem since day one, I would take that in a heartbeat.
Okay, so do you feel that Twitter is still one of the more ideal places to build the 1,000 true fans? Or what would you go to? Would you go to LinkedIn if you could start it all again, or go to Twitter or Instagram? How do you feel about it at the moment?
Well, I have some cost to Twitter because I've been on it. I do think it's the fastest and easiest platform to share ideas and network. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure it's the best one right now, maybe for growth, for specific business ideas. I still think it's the best for networking. I think the model has changed a little bit. I think that if you've got a service and you've got a skill, I think any platform is good, but it's not about putting content out anymore and expecting people to come to you. It's about being a little bit more finessed with your positioning. It's being a little bit more on target with your message. And then it's also a little bit more about actually building relationships. Where I think initially Twitter, especially in 2020, 21, maybe even 22, possibly into a little bit of last year as well, you could just throw shit at the wall and some of it would stick and you would still get clients. But I think maybe the market's matured. I think it's probably gone back to what business should be. I think there was I don't know whether it was the pandemic, more people online, but Twitter was definitely an easier platform to play before. Personally, I still think it's the best one because people are more real. It's much easier to connect with people. I think that if you have a genuine idea and you're posting about a certain topic and you find other people in your sort of your wheelhouse, I think it's easy for you to reach out to people. Some of the best business owners and people making the most money don't have huge followers on Twitter.
So what's the value of Twitter in those people who have small followings but big kind of profits in their business?
Usually because they're very specific, helping a very specific clientele with a very specific problem. It's positioning and specificity. Have I said that word right? Yeah. Could get my teeth in there. That's all right. And I think that's the power of Twitter, is that if you can actually show people that you help people, if you can actually show people that you know what you're talking about, I think it's a lot easier to get clients than it would be maybe on Instagram or TikTok or LinkedIn. I've gotten a little bit of traction on LinkedIn. I'm not fully in the rhythm of it currently. I kind of drift in and out of it. But Instagram and TikTok, I've never really figured out. And I do think there is opportunity, especially on TikTok. I have had a few TikToks go mini viral for me, but they were based upon me speaking about my ideas behind me, like on a green screen, and I like that idea. Mm-hmm. But for me, Twitter, I think it's got the most easy access, and it's got a very high ceiling for business wise, where I think some of them, like maybe Instagram and YouTube and TikTok, there's probably a bit of finessing around skill and ability, and there's a bit more of a harder entry level to get your videos to do well, but it probably has a very good pickup as well. But I'm kind of wandering here a little bit, but I still think bang for your buck, Twitter is probably the best one to test ideas, to actually start on, to connect to people.
The reason I ask is I don't have a Twitter following whatsoever, but I'm wondering whether there's value in, the podcast development, building the podcast out and talking about that story and the experiences in that, because on the content side, we're slowly working on doing more behind the scenes and come along with me pieces of content in shorts, but I wonder if it would also translate to written content in Twitter.
I mean, the platform itself is moving more towards video. So I would test out whatever you're putting on TikTok or Instagram, whatever you're doing in YouTube Shorts. I would be testing that stuff on Twitter as well. I think Elon Musk is definitely trying to make it an all platform that everything does well, like the writing stuff and the video stuff. But I've definitely seen video doing well on here. So but with Twitter, I think if you really want to grow on any platform, I think you have to be a bit more involved in it. I think with TikTok and YouTube, you can almost be like set it and leave it if you have the right positioning. But I think with Twitter, especially to get a start, you've got to be a bit more of a grind in networking and building relationships, if that makes sense. Yeah,
for sure. It makes sense. So, okay. Which means you have to be actively focused on building those relationships and contributing to those communities. And, do you think there's value in having just the wide general life experience content, or you would say it really need to niche down, otherwise there's no point?
Again, it all depends on what you're trying to do. I always come back to depends. It all depends. It sounds sort of like a cop out, but it really does come back to what is your end goal? What set of stairs are you trying to climb? What is the point? If you're trying to build a lifestyle podcast where you talk about lifestyle stuff, talk about lifestyle. But if you're building a business podcast that is around helping people overcome business problems, you'd probably want to be generally always talking about that topic and trying to hit your ICP, your ideal customer profile, all the time, like 80-90% of the time. Everybody loves a bit of shit posting, a bit of like life stuff, but I think you've got to be a bit more targeted if that's your goal. Again, it all depends. Work. The Stephen Covey, great book, the 7 highly effective habits of successful people, whatever the title is. But he starts with this quote: "Start with the end in mind." Yeah. And again, that's getting back into future self and identity. It's like if your podcast identifies as a podcast that does X, Y, and Z, well, you want to talk about X, Y, and Z all the time in your posts. Yeah, for sure. For sure. Well, I mean, this podcast is, exploring the pillars of health, wealth, and wisdom. So that probably answers that. Okay, cool. So I'm conscious of time. We should jump into some kind of general explorations that I'd like to chat to you about. So what's the biggest thing you've changed your mind in? What's the biggest thing you've changed your mind on over the last 2 years? Probably email marketing.
Yeah. How so?
I was in the once a week newsletter gang of Write Along newsletter, and put out a 1,000 to 1,500 word plus maybe 2,000 word newsletter once a week. And I've discovered that writing an email almost daily, Monday to Friday, it just allows me to flow with my ideas more. It creates more momentum. It gives me more content. It's something that I've really switched over in my mindset. I actually find it more enjoyable, because sometimes I'd find the big newsletter kind of like cumbersome and it would start to feel like a chore. Where banging out an email in the morning in my first hour in my deep work zone, it's fun. It's more fun, and I kind of get to do it and move on. Do it and move on. Do it and move on, rather than thinking about this thing. It has to go out on a Thursday morning. It has to go out on a Friday, whatever day I'm choosing. It's like almost becomes like a make work project for yourself. Where if you're doing a daily email, hey, if you miss a day, what are you going to do about it? It's not a big deal. But you're back on the next day.
Yeah, for sure. Do you add the emails to your website as blog posts as well?
I used to do sort of 2 or 3 emails a week, and one of them would be my newsletter, and they are all up on my website as posts. But as the turn of this year, I stopped writing my actual newsletter because I called it the SPS, the Self Performance Strategies newsletter. I actually have a podcast named like that. I stopped that as well at the turn of the year because I pivoted into a different approach to my business because I felt like a lot of my content was content for the sake of content. Where my daily emails are there for me to use as content. So a lot of my daily emails end up a couple of days later, either on Twitter or on LinkedIn, and usually compressed a little bit. So it's like a stream of consciousness. I write out 500 to 600, 700 words. I edit it down a little bit. That goes out as an email. And then over the next day or so, I might have a couple of tweets pulled out of that email. I might actually even post 300 or 400 words of it on LinkedIn with maybe a picture or something. So it's almost like it's part of my content system, but I don't quite put the emails up anywhere for people to read the actual emails. But the ideas and the content themselves get reused in that sort of 24-hour, 48-hour period after it was written.
Sure. Do you manually do that, or do you use kind of like AI tools to help you with that workflow? What's the process?
Sometimes I'll use AI, ChatGPT, to have a quick conversation around an idea. If I'm wanting to write an email on self-belief, I'll just ask ChatGPT a couple of questions around what are the main reasons why people lose self-belief. I'll get into it. I'll have a quick conversation, and then it sparks ideas, and I start pulling out references from my clients and maybe stories from my own life. So I do use AI as a conversational sort of like second brain, where rather than me just like staring at a screen and being like, how do I want to approach this email around self-belief, I'll get ChatGPT to send, to write out like 10 points, and then as I'm reading through those 10 points, the ideas start to. So I use AI like that. I don't use AI to write anything. I don't use AI to redo my work. Obviously, I use Grammarly for spelling, and that's not quite AI, but you know what I mean. It's in that zone. But in general, that's how I use AI as an idea creating machine. I'm not big on actually using AI to make content for me. Because it actually takes the part of it that I enjoy, which is the actual writing of the ideas and letting things come to me. That
makes sense. And what is the kindest thing anyone's ever done for you?
Wow, that's a really, really great question. I mean, wow, that is deep.
What a little we just went. Phew.
Because I'm actually starting to think. I mean, I'd have to obviously my parents did a lot of kind things for me. They give me a platform,
like a specific example.
Thing. Man, that is a deep one. I mean, I had a friend last year, another coach who does different type of coaching to me. He passed me on a client. That was really kind. And
why was that kind?
Because it was unexpected, and it helped me. It helped me get a client during a period of time when I hadn't had one for a month or two, and it actually was a domino that built a little bit of momentum for me.
Did he know that you didn't have clients, and he did that, handballed that to you because of that?
It was just completely out of the blue. I had a pretty tough Christmas run-in. I got COVID and things weren't going well. I didn't do a lot of content, and then I was about to start the new year with nothing, and all of a sudden I got a client, and then getting that client, I don't know, relieved the desperateness in my mindset, or like it relieved like, oh, I've got a client, and the next thing you know I got another one, and the next thing you know I got another one. Do you know what I mean? It was like it's I used to work in sales, and I like to use the old Gil from Simpsons quite a lot. I don't know if you know that character. He's always the sales guy who needs that one more sale, but he has that desperate. He has that desperate energy. He's like old Gil, and there is something to be said about that type of energy. Again, it goes back to the law of assumption. That type of energy creates that desperate need, it creates a negative environment where you end up not getting clients, you end up not flowing, you end up having sales calls that go wrong. But when you have that positive assumption, when you're selling well, you sell more. It's like in sports, when a basketball player or a soccer player is on form, they're playing really well, they're top of the game, everything just seems to go right for them. And that could last for 5 games, it could last for 2 or 3 seasons, it could, it all depends on the type of mentality or the situation. But if someone is kind enough to give me a win that allowed me to build some momentum, that's a beautiful thing from almost a stranger, someone who you've only ever met on Twitter and had a few Zoom calls with. It's a beautiful thing. Yeah,
great. So what will you do based on that positive kind thing that someone else has done for you?
I think there's the old saying, life gives to the giver. So I anytime someone approaches me and they are like, hey, Steve, I want to do X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, well, I actually do A, B, and C, but this person is great at X, Y, and Z. I'm very good at that. I'm always pushing people. I might not necessarily reach out to the person who I recommend, but I've recommended so many people for so many different types of coaching or writing or like people have jumped on calls with me and been like, hey, I get your emails. How good are you are you any good at cold email? And I'm like, I do not do cold email at all, but I know this guy, and this guy that does it. Here's their Twitters, here's their email address. Go do it. So I think that I'm a big believer in giving credit where credit is due, and passing on, giving other people direction and letting them know who you think is the right people to reach out to. Sure.
That makes sense. So the next question, and you probably won't like this one, which is if you could only recommend one book or podcast or experience for somebody to read or do that will have the most impact in their life, so they can only pick one. And that's it. Whatever, it can be a book, a podcast, or experience, something that's just going to have a massive impact in their life. What would it be?
Start a business. That's the experience. It is the fastest way to self-actualize. It's the fastest way to improve yourself. It's the fastest way to come up against your mental, emotional, and physical barriers, your limiting beliefs, internally, externally. It is the fastest way to improve. That is by far the largest hockey stick that you will ever come up against, that you'll ever have in your life if you lean into it.
Why do you say that?
Because the amount of learning you have to do when you first start, if you're really good at, say, coaching, let's just use me as a sort of like a parable or an analogy. I really think that I'm a good coach. I'm a good leader. I'm good at helping people sniff out their bullshit. I've got a unique skill set around that, but that skill set is useless unless I'm able to actually have the energy to use it. That skill set is useless unless I have the ability to communicate and use marketing to attract people. That skill set is useless if I never update it or try to improve it by maybe hiring coaches that do the same thing as me, but they're at a higher level and learning from them. And starting a business puts you in the hot seat where if you want to do the thing that you want to do, there are 3 or 4 or even 5 other skills that you need to get good at, from writing, understanding copy, from knowing how to talk on camera, from being comfortable sharing your ideas, from being open and honest about where you're going, about challenging yourself, fixing your health, fixing how you approach your emotional game. These are all skills that over the last 3 years that I've had to spend time on, reading multiple books, trying different things and taking action on. And that's why I said to you earlier in our conversation that the last 3 years feels like 10 to me, where if I look back to who I was between 32 and 36 or 32 and 37, yeah, I changed, but I kind of feel like fairly similar, where who I was maybe in 2021 when I first started my business to who I am today.
Crazy. Completely different.
It's like the amount of books I've read, the amount of paradigm shifts I've had, the amount of emails I've sent, the amount of content I've put out, the amount of the clients I've coached, all those experiences. It's mental. So if you want to change your life, if you really want to test yourself, get in the arena, start a business. That will change your life.
Okay. And if you could know the absolute truth to one question, what would it be?
The meaning of life, why we're here. I do think it's got something to do with God. I do think that it's got something to do with understanding the kingdom of heaven is inside you, understanding that you are abundant. But that's a feeling. I would love that whispered in my ear by somebody, that you just hear it whispered and you just know every fiber in your body, you know that it's true. You understand why we're here and what we're meant to be doing. Or I do feel like I'm 90% there, that you're meant to be the best version of yourself. You're meant to help other people. You're meant to help yourself. You're meant to raise all boats with you. You're meant to do something that is purpose driven. You're meant to do something that you're interested in. You're meant to understand that you are this beautiful power, that you are this abundant ball of space dust. I do think that's true. I even saying it makes me feel like it. It's just that there are parts of my brain, there are memories of 40 plus years of living, there are failures, there are self-doubt, there are contradictions in my mind that are always there. There's like a dragon of negativity. It might be a small dragon in a tiny cage most days, but some days it does feel like a big dragon coming out of a cave, and I'm like, holy shit, how am I going to beat this guy? But I do think if someone was to come along and whisper in my ear, you're on the right path, this is right, what you're doing, that like you just know, like that's some sort of like spiritual God almost being to let you know the truth, that maybe I already do know it, but that's the one thing. If the question there, if I could know one thing for sure, it would be like, why are we here?
So if you were to be that person or whatever it is whispering in your ear, what would you say with what you know?
With what I know now currently, it would be to say what you're doing is correct. What you're sensing is correct. The what you know, by trying to always tap into that abundant power, is the path. The kingdom of heaven, the abundant power is within you. Just keep following that and remove all contradictions. Okay.
And how would you apply that to your life if you were to apply that to your life right now?
In a sense, I do. It's almost like the thing I discussed earlier, that I'm not really gatekeeping, but I'm not sharing, because it's an idea that I've formulated over the last sort of 6 to 8 months that I've been playing with, and I've not quite landed on it as something that I want to openly discuss, because I haven't quite mastered it myself. But I would say it's very much in line with future self. It's very much aligned with taking the time to breathe, taking the time to go to walks, taking the time to remind yourself that you are walking in the light, that you are aligned with your future self, that you are an abundant power, that using I am statements, I am successful, I am abundant, I am working towards my goals, I am fulfilling my potential 100%, to really tap into that consistently and really just at your core know that what you're doing is right. Because it feels right, and you can talk about it, and when you talk about what you're doing, that it gives you energy, that you feel excited about it. If you're not doing something that doesn't excite you, when you talk about what you're doing for work or your life, and it kind of feels like it's drudgery, it's like a trudge, that you're not aligned with your power, you're not aligned with your inner knowing, you're not aligned with that. But anytime you talk about something and you feel it, I can feel it now talking. When you can imagine the best version of yourself and how that person shows up, and you're like, yes, I'm on the path. That's how I'm using it today in my business. And I try to like push all the results and the noise of outside of that, because the only outside of that away, because the only two things I believe that we have control over is our enthusiasm of how we show up and our skill set. Everything else is outside of our control.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you, Stephen. Is there anything that you're excited about at the moment you want to let listeners in on?
I think I'm excited about where I'm at in my business. I'm pivoting a little bit. I launched my Acorn Thinking programs in April, May of this year. It was a new idea that I landed upon. It's like part of the process of what I've just talked about, of integrating that into my coaching, because I'm starting to see results for myself and my clients that this is actually working. So let's actually start making this part of my programs. And that's what I'm really excited about. I'm really excited about where I am right now and where I get to go because of what I've done over the last 3 years.
Great. And where can people find you if they're interested?
Yeah, if they want to hang out with me, I'm on Twitter every day at Steve Timoney. It's SteveTimoney. Over on LinkedIn, where I'm regularly there 2-3 days a week, but a bit more on Twitter. But on LinkedIn, I'm Stephen Timoney, at StephenTimoney, my actual name. Somebody else stole the Stephen Timoney with a PH on Twitter. There's only about 10 of us in the world, and the other guy beat me to it. He's probably a cousin. But yeah, so that's where I'm mostly at. I'm on YouTube as well under Stephen Timoney. I'm on my website at stephentimoney.com. I have an email list that you can jump onto. You'd find that on my website. You'd find it on my Twitter underneath a lot of my tweets. But yeah, I email 5 to 6 times a week. I talk about these concepts all the time, and I'm very, very focused on helping entrepreneurs and business leaders get out of their own way and get tapped into momentum and really living that dream life that they know they should be living.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Stephen Timoney. I appreciate you. I appreciate your energy. I appreciate you coming on the podcast. Anyone listening to this, if you could give it a subscribe and a rating, it really helps us. And yeah, until next time.